Welcome back to the Low Man Hell podcast. We're talking biggest risers of the season, the Memphis Grizzlies and the Detroit Pistons. We got Bryce Simon coming on from Detroit Pistons Pulse, Game Theory with Sam Vecini, the Motor City Hoops Substack. We get all into the nerdy stuff when it comes to the Pistons. They're 15 games better already, 29 wins, and we're at the All-Star break. It's been a big turnaround. JB Bickerstaff, Trajan Langdon, they flipped the whole thing around. Cade Cunningham, first-time All-Star. We dig into all the nerdy stuff when it comes to the Pistons. Hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome back. We're here with Bryce Simon from Motor City Hoops, the Pistons Pulse, and Game Theory with Sam Vecini. What a treat it is to have you on the pod. Bryce, welcome. Thanks for being here.
What's up, Mark, man? Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm excited. The nice thing about the Pistons not being awful anymore is other podcasts actually want to talk about them. So whether it's Cade Cunningham being an all-star, potential all-NBA, or them winning games or whatever, it's a renewed energy for the Detroit Pistons right now.
Yeah, man. It's awesome. It's like a rising tide just raises all the ships. So yeah, Cade's all-star is really cool, but you're doing more pods. That's the real treat here.
Yeah.
Man, well, Detroit 29, 26, plus 15 wins from last year. I think that's the whole story. We're at the All-Star break. They've already blown past their win total from Vegas for the year, plus 15 with 27 games to play. They're kind of like middle of the road in net and offense and defense. I don't think that's the story. It's more, the trip out of coaching purgatory from Dwayne Casey and then Monty Williams and now into the JB Bickerstaff era, out Troy Weaver, out Monty Williams, in Trajan Langdon, in JB Bickerstaff, and like just vibes going on in Detroit, man. Like, give me a little overview of like how the pulse is right now for the Pistons.
Yeah, man. It's the Pistons Pulse, every episode we start like, hey, what are the vibes? Because it didn't used to be like that, Mark. Like it was truly, who are they trading away at the deadline? Who is good in the draft and not the number one pick because we know they're going to fall to number 5. So who's the 5th best player? Yeah, even what happens for them. Like they did get Cade Cunningham, so it's hard to complain about it too much. But after a team goes through a whole season of winning 14 games, after other seasons of winning games in the teens or the low 20s, it's just like anything positive. And if they went this whole season and won 28 games the whole year, that would have been positive. That would have been a step forward. And they're 3 games over 500 right now with 29 wins. They've more than doubled that win total. Unless something crazy happens, they're going to play at least a play-in game. And that is not something I anticipated being able to break down this season. So shout out Trajan for putting a roster around Cade Cunningham that makes sense. And shout out JB Bickerstaff for coming in with a renewed energy, new defensive ideas and identity. And even the offensive stuff isn't bad. And just shout out those guys along with the players who lived that mark and then have come back this season and really, I guess, learned from it and grown from it.
Yeah, I think like, yes, JB, yes, Trajan, but like the players, because it's easy to think like this is the standard. And I think it all kind of goes back to the guy that we talked about earlier, Cade. And we're going to get deeper into Cade here. We're going to talk a lot of Cade Cunningham stuff, but like he's the barometer. He's the North Star for this team. And like you can tell for even in the previous years, he doesn't see himself as a loser. So in those moments when they were losing, like there's so many like edits and cuts of like how he looks in those moments. Like you can tell he never saw himself as that. And I think there's a lot of people that with the number 1 pick and the money that comes with it, like it's kind of easy to be like, you know what, I'll be fine. But like he's built a little bit different. So like to see them come out of it, to see guys rally around, they've got some adults in the room, guys that weren't used to losing, Fontecchio, Beasley, Hardaway Jr. Like they've got some guys around. Tobias is back. Forever a Piston. Tobias is back. They've got some guys that know how to play basketball. They know how to play adult basketball. They know what it takes to win. And they've kind of like merged into this like vet with kind of some things to prove, and also young guys trying to learn this coalition of guys that just makes it work.
And I will say one thing that I've learned from Trajan's short tenure is veterans that are available. Like that is one other thing where, whenever Troy Weaver was bringing guys in, like sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, whatever. Trajan has seemed to put a priority. If you look at his additions, starting with Tobias, Malik, and Tim Hardaway Jr., those were guys whenever I was doing my, posts for my Substack, all of a sudden I'm looking at their average games played over the previous 5 seasons, all guys that had played like 70 games during the regular season. Even Dennis Schroeder, like I know what he did in Golden State wasn't what people wanted or what Golden State wanted, but another guy that's available. So not only is Trajan prioritizing floor spacing and gravity and leadership and veterans and all of that, but available ones. And if you look at this Pistons roster that has played, 55 games, everybody that is in the rotation consistently has played at least 50, other than, of course, the injury to J.I. And then Asar had the blood clots in the offseason and has just started playing, but he's been consistent since he came back. Mm-hmm. Like it's been a very available team. And I think that's part of the overall success as well. And having that availability allows you to see what Cade is, what J.I. was before he got hurt, Jalen Durant. Like consistency matters, and they're getting that with their lineups and rotations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, it's fine to have guys on the roster, but they're not actually on the court playing the minutes, like doing the things. Like you're not really getting that leadership or that adult leadership that you're looking for to kind of progress guys forward. It's one thing when somebody comes off the floor and they make a few mistakes as a rookie and they sit down next to a vet and they're talking them through. But it's a whole other thing when that vet is low man or that vet is the X out and they're telling you where to be. And then you get that communication during the free throw, following it or whatever it is. And they're talking you through it in real time. They're encouraging you through it. They're actually showing you what it takes to set the standard of good adult basketball in the league. And I think that's really important. It's a great point.
Can I give you a very specific example?
Please,
with Tim Hardaway?
Give me all the examples.
So Tim Hardaway,
get nerdy.
Okay, we're about to get nerdy. Tim Hardaway Jr., not known for his defense, right? Like that's not the first thing you're going to bring up with Tim Hardaway Jr. Tim Hardaway Jr. is like top 5 in the NBA in charges drawn. And I bring it up all the time. To your point, it's one thing for Tim Hardaway Jr. if he was only playing 20 of 55 games to look at Cade Cunningham and be like, hey, Cade, you should have, you're a low man. You should have rotated over and taken a charge. If I'm Cade Cunningham, I'm like, dude, I'm the number 1 pick. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't even stay on the court. But no, Hardaway Jr. has played 51 games this season, has taken charges in multiple of those games, drawn offensive fouls in other ways, and now it's literally on tape. He can say, listen, like, I don't, like, this sucks. He hits his head and, like, gets a concussion. That's why he missed a game or two, was taking a charge, and then he comes back and does it again. And it's like, okay, Tim Hardaway Jr. is willing to do this. Why won't you do this, Ron Holland? Why can't you do this, Jaden Ivey, et cetera? It's like, it's just an example, and there's all sorts, right? Tobias does it. Everybody does it. But to your point, if those guys are just sitting on the bench in street clothes, they can't look at these young guys and say, hey, you should have taken a charge there. They're actually physically showing them how to do these things and what it takes to play winning basketball.
Yeah, it's a big deal. So before we get too deep into it, just one word answer. The Detroit Pistons will play a play-in game, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Whew, man, I mean, for them to even be in the position where we're saying that as they would be a top 6 seed and not a bottom 3 in the conference is such a big deal. And I think it starts for me, the tentpole of the team, Cade Cunningham. And when I watch him play, one of the things that just pops so much is his development and evolution in the pick and roll. And he's one of those guys that when you're a lead ball handler, you're going to be in so many 2-man actions, and he leads the league in handoffs run. He's up there 3rd in the NBA in pick and rolls run. Like their offense is really just, I mean, if he wasn't there, like, I don't know what it would look like, because their offense is truly heliocentric of it's Cade in these 2-man actions, and then we're going to play off the advantages he can create. And he's done such a wonderful job of adding shooting. Shooting does something where you can create this fear in other teams where you can bring 2 to the ball. You can create these 4-on-3, 3-on-2 situations for your teammates where they can play advantage basketball. And his evolution of shooting the ball versus drop coverage, his evolution of pushing the volume in that area and making teams bring 2 up to the level. He's routinely getting blitz, bringing 2 up to the level, and then playing in the pocket with guys. Like that to me is the story of this Pistons team. It's the story of those 29 wins. It's how they get the machine moving. So give me a little bit on what you've seen from Cade this year and how your feelings towards him moving forward as like a guy for a team.
Well, first, to start with what you talked about there, if you can just go under the ball screen because he can't pull up and make a three, then you don't need to put 2 on the ball, right? Like you go under the screen, you meet him on the other side, and the pick and roll and ball screen situation is completely non-existent. Like, yeah, you can rescreen and do some things, but like eventually that gets old having to do it every single time. I'm working, shameless plug later, whenever this comes out, I will have a post on the Substack, Motor City Hoops Substack, breaking all of this down, all of the nuance of his ball screen. And one of the big things is people are putting 2 on the ball all the time, and he's consistently making the right decisions. And then it comes down to the Jalen Durans, the Isaiah Stewarts, the Asar Thompsons of the world making the right decisions out of that, whether to score or make the short roll read or whatever. But it's the nuance. Like, I think he plays really good patience with the ball screen. He does as good about anybody as setting up the screen. He takes his man away. He really makes his defender work. He'll take him away, then he'll come off. Then he'll gel it into a snake. The big will set a highway, then he's to the rim, or he'll set it up and then he's going to cross over between the legs and he's going to refuse it and attack back the other way. Like, he just has all of those things along with the passing reads. One thing I really enjoy watching NBA players do, and Cade is really good at this, he'll give you the fake pocket pass now, Mark. Like, he'll fake the pocket pass and he'll get that big man to step that way, put his hand in the window, and then now he can attack all the way to the rim. Or he'll fake the lob to Duran, get the big man defender's hands up, and then now he can attack the defender who's risen up out of his stance. Because, and that only works if you have the lob chemistry with your big. And listen, the Jalen Duran conversation can go a lot of directions. There's no doubt that him and Cade have real good chemistry and trust in the ball screen, pick and roll, lob stuff.
Yeah, I think just thinking about it, one thing that's going to be really incredible for this team is they're going to see themselves in situations where whether it's play-in or hopefully a whole playoff series where teams are scheming for them, and they're going to get to see like, this is what we're going to take away. Like, this is going to be the next layer for your team to progress through. And I think just seeing it in the regular season, the biggest thing that teams are doing is that they beat Cade up. Like, the Pacers have had success with them of putting Nembhard on the ball, like really wearing Cade down. And I think one of those things that they're going to see offensively is when you bring a second person up to the level with Cade, because he's going to have games where he's going to show that he'll beat you 4 out of 7 times if you don't bring a second up to the ball in these 2-man actions with him. So when you bring a second player up to the ball, what does this Pistons machine look like once we get to 4-on-3, 3-on-2? And do we have the right pieces in place down the road 2, 3, 4 years that are going to actually fit the best with our 1A player, with our tentpole player? And so when you think about that and the evolution of this team going forward, because they've shown they're a serious team and they have a serious player, do the guys that they have, do you think that they're the right guys? I mean, we're going to get to see it. So like, that's going to be really fun. And,
yeah,
this is all upside for the Pistons. Like, there's, they're in data collection mode. Like,
you said it. It's my favorite phrase for the season, data collection. I love it.
They're in data collection mode, man. This is all upside. The ride, the journey up is the best part. Like, this is so cool for them and their fans. So like, I'm excited. The Duran stuff in the pocket, I'm a little bit concerned that he's not the right big for Cade, but I'm excited to see what happens when he gets to see it multiple times in a row against one single opponent, and he gets to see like, okay, this is what I'm going to get. This is what I need to make happen. So what are your feelings on these kind of complementary parts around the Cade 2-man game?
Yeah, it's funny. The data collection has been my whole thing this season. And it's funny because we went from a season where every other team would rest their best players, right? So you couldn't even like really, even if they won a game of the 14, it's like, well, they didn't play their 3 best players. So what's it matter? Now they're getting other teams' best every night. They're playing teams where it's like, hey, that team's bringing it because this may be a tiebreaker come playoff standings and stuff. Like, people keep talking about the play-in and the playoffs. I'm like, guys, we're getting real basketball right now, which we haven't seen for 4 seasons right now. I mean, they get the Spurs on Friday. And so and the other thing I like to say is proof of concept. To me, Malik Beasley has been proof of concept. If you put an elite floor spacer, off-ball player who understands relocations, that has real gravity, It's going to be good for that player, Malik Beasley, second in the NBA in 3-pointers made, and it's going to be good for Cade and J.I. And so that's what we saw there. Now it's these other guys. I also said the two most important people to find things out, because I always thought Cade was this guy, was Jay Nivey and Jalen Duren, because they're extension eligible this offseason, Mark, and you got to make a decision because feelings can start to get felt if those contracts aren't offered or agreed upon. And unfortunately, J.I. got hurt. J.I. was shooting 40%. So to your question, is J.I. a guy that can play off of Cade? I think the catch and shoot was getting there. I also think in an advantage situation, a scramble situation, you give J.I. a first step against a 4-on-3, that's a really good spot for J.I. to be in. Yeah. And to your point, I said this on the Pistons Pulse. People were asking, who do you want him to play? I want him to play the Celtics. Give me the biggest, baddest dudes on the block and let them expose everything. I don't care if they win a first-round series. I don't. I want everything to get exposed that needs to be exposed. And if that's, hey, Jalen Duren can't make the short roll read 10 possessions in a row, they need to know that. Maybe he can. Or, you know what I would do? I would make Jalen Duren score it. I would make him hit the short roll floater 10 times in a row. I would stay home and not give him the passes. And so to your question, sorry, this is a long way of getting there. I don't think we have the data yet. I don't know if we know what Asar is going to look like. He's been really good recently, but can he make the, what are they going to do when nobody guards him? When they literally stand on the block, what's going to happen? So I think we're going to get those answers, but a couple of them have been answered, I guess. We're going to get answers to those questions. Floor spacing makes Cade an all NBA level player. And then we're going to find out some of those other answers as the season goes on and into potentially the postseason. Yeah.
You've got a lot of guys on rookie deals. You've got a lot of things that are up in the air and yet to be decided. I think they probably got a little bit of like a win-win there with, never want to see somebody get hurt, but like Ivy at this point I don't know that his representation is going to be in a place where they're going to be like, no, you need to give us this. I think they'll have a chance where, he's seen an injury, like it'll probably offer him something that's going to be like, a life-changing money, but maybe not even close to what it would have been if he would have kept playing. So like whether he takes it or not, plays a prove-it year, who knows? And then Duren, Stewart's got a little bit of money, Thompson, Ron Holland, like they've got these bites of the development apple, and one of those guys popping will be a huge deal. Do you have one as you've watched them that you see like, I kind of think this player archetype would pop. And I know Thompson's the easiest one to pick at because, he's a really, really great cutter off the ball. Gives you those defensive vibes of like shut down wing, like shut down corner, Revis Island, Deion Sanders. Like we put this guy on this guy and nobody else has to worry about it, which is a huge deal. And he can guard up, can guard down. So like he's the easiest one, but the shooting is a real thing. When you get to the playoffs, like, it's going to be something where it's not so much about your percentage. We talk about, Seth Partnow and the Robeson rule. And, it's more about your volume. Like, are you going to shoot 8 of them where it actually matters to us? I don't care if you go 1 for 2 and you shoot 50%, but are you going to shoot the volume that matters? So, all these developmental guys, like, is there one that you're rooting for the most that you think like this guy matters to us, like our ceiling?
So listen, I'm a JI guy. I've been a supporter from the start. Whenever the fan base got down on him, I kind of stayed positive because my whole point was, listen, I don't know if JI ends up being the Robin to Cade's Batman or not, but my argument was always JI can play off of Cade. This can work with these two guys together when a lot of people didn't think it could. And I was just like, I think JI can do this. I think he's actually needs to be an off-ball player in a starting lineup and then stagger the minutes and let him run the second unit against other teams, second agree. Units. You know what I mean? And so the question with JI is, can he do it consistently? We've seen games where it's like, could be what top 5 backcourt in the NBA. And then we've seen games where JI wasn't making shots and, stuff like that. And so it's not anywhere close to that. So, but that's what they need to find. They have to find the number 2. Listen, I think Asar Thompson is awesome and all the things you said about him are true. I don't think he's your number 2 guy on like a real contender type team. Ron Holland has like 2-way wing potential. I don't know that I'm betting my house that he's that guy. Jalen Duren isn't that guy. So to me, J.I. is the only guy that potentially ends up being that. And that's why I wanted more data, information, right? Like I want to know, Is he that guy, or is he like actually a sixth man, like a great sixth man type of guy or something like that? And if he's not, my guess is you end up moving draft picks and one or two of these young guys to go get that guy.
Yeah.
And Mark, probably sooner rather than later, because I know you kind of laughed at me whenever I said top 5 backcourt in the NBA. Cade is an all NBA player. Like, you have the one guy.
Yeah, you got the guy.
You have the guy. You got to find the next guy. And I think you need to do that probably over the next 12 months. If it's not this offseason, then it's next deadline.
Yeah, he's like Luka light to me.
Yeah,
like
sure.
He's not quite as big. He doesn't shoot it as well, from deep. And it's more so of like maybe we see something different when he gets to the playoffs. Like, I don't know if he has like as much arrogance, and you need that. If you're going to be the best guy on the best team in the league, like, you got to be arrogant when it comes to like, I can shoot this from 32 if you go under. Like, there's a lot of the Minnesota plays where you look at the Luka stuff and it's like, if somebody goes under at the logo, like, you better let it rip and like really like set the standard of like, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. So I think of him as like kind of like that tier, just like a little tier below those guys that are like the top echelon playoff guys that really strike fear in your heart. And J.I. to me, you mentioned this about Beasley earlier. J.I. to me is kind of in this like tweener place. He reminds me of Jordan Clarkson, where he's like a tweener. He's not quite a point guard. He's not quite a elite shooting guard in the sense of like, you can put him off movement stuff. Like, you can run him off pin downs and he has that gravity to him. He's kind of in this tweener place. And I don't know if the guy next to Cade is a tweener. I don't know if it's this guy that you wanted to run your second unit throughout the season. And then, because the biggest thing to me is like, yes, J.I. can run the second unit. But the biggest thing is you want him to be the biggest compliment he can possibly be to Cade's Batman. And you mentioned Beasley really unlocking stuff. If you go down this road with the J.I. thing, he's going to be on the court in that Beasley spot. And if he can't do those things that you've seen unlock it, well, then we kind of have to find the guy that fits in there next to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough needle to thread being that guy. This is why I have so much respect for what Kyrie has done the last year and a half playing off of Luka. I think Kyrie was one of the most underappreciated players in the league because he plays off Luka really, really well in a starting lineup. And I know this isn't even a conversation anymore. It's about to be Austin Reeves' role, quite honestly, is who's going to have to do it now. But then Kyrie he shifts his mentality to being the man when Luka's off the floor. I think this is what has made Cleveland phenomenal this year. And it's not quite the same 1A, 1B, like they're a little bit more on the same, but it's Donovan and Darius. And again, I give Darius a lot of credit because Darius plays off of Donovan really well, relocates all of that. And then when Donovan steps off the floor, Darius is like, okay, this is my show now. I can take over. Mm-hmm. To your point, I don't know that J.I. thrives off the ball in the same way those guys do.
Yeah.
He's getting closer. Like, I think he would
those guys are all a different level shooter than J.I. And I think that's the biggest swing thing. Like, they're a different level shooter.
What I would say is I think it would surprise most people that J.I. is over 40% from three right now. Now, again, he got hurt. It was only a 30-game sample, but he's like at 35% from his career on, I think, over 800 attempts or something. He's right there at like, if I told you he ends up being career 36.5, 37% from three, I don't think that's crazy. And I think that's where he needs to get to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really his catch and shoot is what's when he's making shots, it's the catch and shoot. Like, honestly, the bigger question is like, hey, can he make shots off the dribble when he is in the second unit and people go under the ball screen? But I understand people who don't think he's the ideal guy to be that Robin.
This is like, did you ever think you'd be having these Pistons conversations last year? Like, did you think like this is where we're trending towards? Like, the Pistons pulse is thriving.
Mark, you don't understand. I had to defend Cade Cunningham being a dude. Like, I had people in my DMs trying to tell me how bad Cade sucked and he wasn't going to be that good, that Cade wasn't a primary initiator, that he should go play off the ball, and that J.I. was this. And you know who the biggest one was that now everybody loves is Isaiah Stewart. Pistons fans, people wanted to kick him to the moon to take the Bon Tim's Killian Hayes comment. Shout out Killian Hayes, 10-day with the Brooklyn Nets, back in the league. But it's like, I had to defend Isaiah Stewart so much that he didn't suck. I'm not saying Isaiah Stewart's the best big in the league, but he's pretty darn valuable as the first big off the bench because of what he does defensively, set screens, all that. Wish he'd go back to trying to space the floor a little bit. That's another conversation. I spent a lot of games watching him try to learn to shoot threes, and then now it's just gone. But anyway, you're right. Like, the conversations are crazy because that used to be what it was, and now it's something complete. I get to break down basketball, Mark. I get to break down how Cade manipulates ball screens, or how Ausar attacks space, or you know what the funnest thing is? They're playing the Suns, and every time KD got a switch, they would automatically morph into a zone. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. This is like nerd stuff now that we can talk about because they like play competent, competitive basketball.
Yeah, that's great. Cade, I love Cade. I love the process. I broke down a little bit of pick and roll stuff for him. There's one thing that, and we can move on from Cade. There's one thing that I think like the shot has really come along. His willingness I always think like volume matters so much. Like percentage is great, but volume matters, and shot profile, like what shots you can take, what shots you're willing to take, what you see as great shots. Sometimes I see him, he's in this one hurdle right now in his development, and it's when he plays going downhill left. And sometimes you will see him reach for this inside right finish, and he'll get one blocked every now and again. And then you'll see him go into the lefty finish, goofy foot lefty finishes. And you can see him kind of like in real time this season, kind of like taking these little baby steps with his left hand and knowing that like, hey, even if I miss with my left, it's okay because I'm going to be able to get this shot every time. If I take this right, I give up the angle, I get this shot blocked. So like, let me stop going to it. And then his natural instincts as a player kind of always go back to it a little bit. But like, it's fewer and farther between each like kind of 20 games that I see him play. And like, that's been one of the fun things I've seen in his just little micro development.
I love it, man. It's amazing. You're like one of the non like Pistons content creators that I can tell have really watched the game, because I literally clipped out a clip today of Krisha from the Hawks blocking this shot, the very shot you're talking about. Cade goes in, tries to do the right hand scoop on the left side, and Krisha gets it and he blocks it. No. And I'm like, Cade, just extend with your left. What are we doing?
He'll get back to it. Like in the same game too. Like almost like a couple possessions later, like he'll get back to it, which is like one of those things you can see him. He's working through it, which is, I love to see guys work through the process. And for him to be doing it in real time in game, to me, that's one of the things. Like I would always have these moments with guys when I'd be working with them, and you see them do something like this in game, and you know the next time you go to the film with them, you can bring it up and you can treat it as like this matrix moment where if you hit it right, and if they've like really like mentally thought about like what you think you've seen them do, you can get it to where like you use it as this matrix moment where they never go back from that, and they understand like this is the way forward. So like it's cool to see him do that. All right, last thing, we'll get you out of this here on this. 27 games left for the Pistons in the regular season. What do you want to see over these 27 games?
Yeah, I mean, I still think and hold to J.I. and J.D. being the biggest things that Trajan Langdon and the front office need to know as much as possible about. I don't know what we're going to see or whatever. So my eyes are the most on Jalen Duren. I think I know what Cade Cunningham is. Maybe there's a ceiling beyond that. Like, and if he gets to that ceiling, like they're in a really, really good spot. But I have a feeling that I know that Cade he's going to be, I don't think all NBA is going to be a one-time thing, I guess would be what I'd say.
I'm there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you have a guy that's making all NBA in that conversation, you're in good shape. Who's going to go along for the ride with him? Malik Beasley, he's proof of concept, but he's not a long-term answer. Like you just know you got to put floor spacing around him. We've seen that from him and THJ, Tobias Harris. It's about the young guys. Ron Holland's a rookie. We knew he wasn't going to fully be ready. I've seen plenty to be happy with what he's done in his rookie season. It's really Jalen Duren. Can the defense continue to get better? We love to nerd out and talk nuanced things. Can you keep your hand in the passing window? Can you get your hand up whenever the lob man gets behind you? Can you stay square in the ball screen and stop turning your hips to the handler so you can't recover to the roll man? Like, can we stop doing those things and get better with them? That's what I want to see. And he has shown signs of growth, but how far can it go with another 27 games and then postseason play? And then one little thing with Asar. Listen, I don't know if Asar ever shoots it. I'm not betting a whole lot of money that he does. Can he contact space? Can he dribble into a DHO? Can he make teams pay? Because there are ways to do it. Draymond Green is, whatever you think about him, he was able to live in this world where nobody guarded him at the 3-point line, and he still figured it out. There's ways. Amin is doing it in Houston. Can Asar do that? And sneaky thing, Mark, can he play primary initiator? Because we've seen them experiment with it.
They've been trying to do it. They've been trying to do it.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
Okay, it's the thing that if you're a non-gravity player, it's the way that you can create the most possible gravity. So
correct.
And also they've been, before Schroeder, there was this stretch of games where JI went down, and it was truly like, I like Sasser, like he's fine, but like it was truly one of those things where it was like Cade was getting beat up for 94 feet of floor, and this allowed them to take the pressure off Cade because Asar is normally guarded by the worst possible perimeter defender. And so you're not going to get 94 feet of pressure from that guy. And so it allowed them to kind of like release Val this whole thing and take some pressure off Cade, give him some energy back, let him go into the action coming from an advantage, more DHO stuff, more catch and the screen coming to him. I think, if I'm being honest, like that was one of those things of like, that's a life raft that we needed for this 10 games. If you're thinking he doesn't have the creativity or the ball handling that his twin has, and that's kind of like how they get away with playing that floor spacing in Houston. I think when I see his twin playing anything that's open court, offensive rebound, scramble situation, transition, lights out. Like sign me up for both Thompson twins in those situations. Half court, set defense, shell. I don't know if I want to buy a ton of that stock.
He doesn't have the handle, as you mentioned. I don't think he has the body control and stuff as well that Amin has. It is. I think it's
hard to handle the ball in the NBA. I think that's
really hard.
It is very, very difficult to handle the ball in the NBA. And the standard for what you have to have, not only like handwork wise, but foot and hip work wise, is really, really high level, because these guys are phenomenal athletes. And when you're playing defense, I know people think they don't play defense, but when you're playing defense, you don't have to worry about transferring any energy to the ball. Like it's just pure athleticism. So like when they see a shaky ball handler, it's like it's like a deer, a wounded deer in the Amazon. Like they're like, we're going to attack this right now. So I think people don't understand the standard that it takes as a ball handler to be able to actually handle an NBA games.
And it goes beyond beating your primary defender, because again, like I kind of scoff at, NBA players don't play defense. It's like, do you realize how hard it is with the floor spacing? But it's navigating secondary. There's always somebody else coming, Mark. So you either have to navigate the secondary defender with a dribble or with some sort of step, or manipulate. One thing I've learned with Asar is he's been so athletic. This is a little bit of assumption, I guess. He's been so athletic his whole life. He just goes and finishes. Yes. And it's very like on a straight plane.
Yes.
And it's like, no. NBA rim protectors are too good for that. You have to manipulate the ball when the rim protector comes, or you're going to get blocked. And so that's one thing he's learning. But you have to have good body control to do that. You have to have control of everything as you get there. Like this isn't easy stuff.
We're too deep into this. We're too deep into Asar as a ball handler. Nerd. Like, I mean, it's a filtration system. Yes. Like
your podcast is called Low Man Help. Like that is the whole point,
okay,
right?
I'll give you one thing on the Asar finishing, because I dug into him last year. When you're catching the basketball, you are transferring energy as an athlete. When you are you're just doing one thing. When you're dribbling the basketball, you see a lot of these long strides from Asar, and that's like what you were talking about, straight line. I just need to get there. It's like a football setting of like, well, if I get from point A to point B first, I win. But in the NBA, you have to get to point B, and you have to be able to transfer energy vertical. You have to be able to transfer it sideways. You have to be able to read early help, late help, no help, whatever it is. And so a lot of the times what I would see from him is these long steps, these like, I'm trying to get there. And when you have long steps in the NBA, you're not capable of transferring that energy at full speed. And so, like, to me, that's the biggest thing when I see him handling the ball and attacking downhill. That's the thing that I don't see evolving that I would like to see evolving.
He has to be able to attack that space in a whether it's like the primary initiator or he gets the whip pass onto the weak side. Yeah,
he's a phenomenal cutter. He's got a really high IQ.
But to your point, he can't always cut into Jalen Duren's space. Like, that's been an issue sometimes, is they cut into the same space. And like,
they do some nice stuff when Duren's in the pocket and he'll be in the corner. He'll be in the corner and he'll cut instead of spacing. There's some where I see Holland and him on like the 2-man side and like pick and roll stuff, and you just see it and you see the defensive spacing. It's regular season. You're like, ooh. That might not look so great.
Which is why this is why the playoffs will be interesting. And I wonder if Holland gets cut out of the playoff rotation. To be honest with you, like it's a real. To answer the very original question before we got into this, Jalen Duren is the thing that's most important. The defense and also offense, the things you've brought up and highlighted, because they're going to put 2 on the ball. Can you consistently make the right decisions? Can you finish? Especially your non-dunk finishes, those type of things. So Jalen Duren is the guy for the 27 games.
I can't wait to see it, man. I'm excited to see Cade in that setting. I'm excited to see the whole Pistons organization in that setting. And I'm excited to see everything you put out when we get down to that point and leading up to it. Pistons Pulse, Motor City Hoops Substack, Game Theory with Sam Vecini, Bryce Simon. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, man. This is a blast. We nerd out anytime. I love it.
All right, cool. We'll talk to you soon. All right, welcome in to Parker Fleming from Subtsakalidis, covering the Memphis Grizzlies. We're so excited to have him here. We're talking Grizz. Parker, welcome to the pod.
Mark, I appreciate you having me. Quite frankly, I got to say, you know a lot of ball, and I've learned a lot from your Substack. So being on this show and getting to, really talk hoops, like aside from like the clickbait stuff that everybody wants to hear, like the trade deadline and trade rumors and stuff like that. It's good to just like talk ball on this pod, and I'm ready to talk some Grizzlies with you, Mark.
Yeah, you guys, the Grizz had a pretty, mundane trade deadline. Nothing too crazy. I bet they wish they had the Marcus Smart picks back, but we're talking Grizz. The Grizz right now, second in the West, 36-18 on the year, plus 9 wins already from last year's 27 win total. They were bit by the injury bug last year. They don't have the bug going this year. They're churning through some of the teams they're facing. Jaren Jackson Jr. coming off All-Star break. They're explosive offense, first in points in the league, second in possessions, fourth in net rating, second to last in turnovers. So they're giving the ball away a little bit. We're going to dig into all that. It's really nice to have you here. Memphis Grizzlies 24-25 season. Give me your first initial thoughts. Like how's this first 2/3 of the season been, and where are you at with this team?
I think if I can sum it up in a word, and there's a bunch of layers beyond it, but it's just refreshing, because last year, you had all these injuries, and I even remember they had just gotten off of this big win against the Los Angeles Lakers where Ja, Bane, Jaren, and Smart all scored over 20 points. And they were now 6-3 with Ja Morant back in the lineup. And you're like, okay, they're about to make a charge here and really make a play, like probably get in through the play-in and then go make a playoff run through that. But then after the weekend, Ja Morant out for the year with a shoulder injury. And then in Dallas, Marcus Smart broke his finger doing the 3 to the head celebration. Like, it's just like, you can't make this up.
Can't make that up.
And in the next game, Desmond Bane sprained his ankle, out for 6 weeks on a drive. So it's just kind of like, all right, this is the kind of season it is. Let me kind of just do this draft prep, watch a crap ton of UConn and Kentucky and
just
Nashville.
Numb the pain.
Yeah. But also, so like, not only is it refreshing from a health standpoint, but Mark, you've followed basketball for a long time. The Grizzlies have never been that team that flies up and down the floor, not only shoots a lot of threes, but makes a lot of threes. And, this year, first in points per game. But the thing that catches my eye the most is they are 6th in the league in 3-point percentage shooting, over 37% from 3. They had not been in the top 10 in 3-point percentage in 17 years. It's so like everyone, whether it's free agency, the draft, or trade deadline, it's always like the Grizzlies need shooting. But it was like the first year where it was like That's not what they need. They have a lot of shooting. They just kind of needed another playoff rotation guy to put them over the hump. But I mean, look, they couldn't get that with Marcus Smart at the trade deadline, and now they just kind of cut their losses and went the salary flexibility route. But it's just been really refreshing to watch a new brand of Memphis Grizzlies basketball that's, not only healthy, but it's also succeeding as well. They look like, even if they're not in that inner contender circle with Oklahoma City, Boston, and Cleveland, they are with the Denvers, the Lakers, the Bucks as that next part of the outer circle of okay, if things break right, they have a shot. Obviously, a lot of things, and I'm sure we'll get into them, but it's just been really nice to watch good competitive Grizzlies hoops again.
You're loving it. You're back in hoops nirvana. They're playing fast. This is no longer grit and grind Memphis. They have the second most possessions in the league behind Atlanta. Every game, 103. That's a lot of possessions. That's a lot of chances. One thing you talked about the shooting. One thing that stood out to me watching them throughout the year is they're opportunistic in the shooting. They're third in the league in transition threes. Like when they get it and I've always been a believer in, from the time I was young, transition threes. Like if you're a good shooter, you can take this shot in rhythm and on balance, and there's much more space than how difficult it is to get one in the half court. So stats like that, I love that. You talked about their offense, and this has been they reworked the coaching staff over the offseason. This has been one of those things where, Ben Taylor, I was talking to Ben. Ben did a big thing on their offense. This is, same offense that took Germany by storm, took Paris basketball to EuroLeague. So you've now watched it. One thing I love about it is I love the off-ball movement. When I worked with clients, I would call it whims. Where is my space? They're consistently making these second window whims reads where there's a drive and they're drifting behind the first help defender in the gap. They're getting catch and shoots out of it. They're getting catch and drives and keeping the blender, the machine moving. So you've seen it now for 60 some odd games. What's your biggest takeaway? And have you seen it from the beginning of the year kind of start to mold into more of a common NBA offense? Have you seen the trend lines going either direction where you're like, ooh, maybe this is good for the playoffs, maybe this is not so good?
I think it's good for the playoffs, and I guess I'll put an asterisk next to it, and it depends on about how Ja Morant continues to adjust to it. Obviously, he's a heavy pick and roll player, has always been a heavy pick and roll player. He's playing, I would say, with less quality pick and roll partners, with going from Steven Adams to Zach Edey in the pick and roll is just entirely different. You're going from a one-of-one screen setter, veteran screen setter, to a rookie one, still learning those intricacies. But but the whole standpoint where I think it could work in the playoffs is I talked to a player about this, and he said, no, you no longer have to focus on just the stars. You have to account for all five of us on the basketball court. And the Wims thing is it's on point. Obviously, I would say from the beginning of the year to now, it almost is so routine where I kind of I'm looking for it. It's are they still doing this offense? I can't tell because it's so natural now going into 60 games. And it's really neat because as there's downhill motion, they love getting into the paint. That's been the MO for this Grizzlies team since Taylor Jenkins took over. They get into the paint, and then you have that circular motion around them where you said, Wims, where is my space? They're chasing space. That's really cool because Taylor Jenkins had said he's taken influences from other sports, specifically soccer, and how soccer, you chase the space. Yeah. You try to attack where the space is. I think one of the cooler examples of finding that is just watch Luke Kennard recently. They've been using him more as a driver, so he would drive and he would pass, but then chase an open space and be wide open from three. And Luke Kennard, he's shooting 57% on unguarded catch and shoot threes. It's a good shot for him. Yeah. But they're like you said, they're being a lot more opportunistic with the players around them. It's not just with the 3-point shooting; they're cutting a lot more. They love that slot cut that JJ Redick and LeBron James made famous at that game. From I want to say that was more of a Noah LaRoche approach where they would drive, they would have somebody coming from the slot, they would use that zero decel step and almost waiting for that window to open up to kind of flip it over for a layup. Obviously, They're opportunistic. They can get a little too ambitious. That's why they are 29th in the league in turnovers. But it's been really cool for them to kind of run this and go against the grain, because the NBA, it's all about finding competitive advantages. And I think that this is one that they are identifying. And if they continue to exploit it, we'll see. I mean, obviously it's different game planning for a 7-game series, but I enjoy the returns thus far. Again, the whole point of it was to elevate their half-court offense. They're 13th in the league right now in half-court offense after being in the bottom 10 since Taylor Jenkins took over. So
it's a big zag. They're the only team right now in the league whose first action, according to Second Spectrum, it's their primary action isn't pick and roll. There's 29 teams ahead of them that are running pick and roll, and they're the only team that they run isolations more than pick and rolls. So they're close. They're not far away, but they're 7 pick and rolls, 8 pick and rolls away from the 29th team. They're running about 25 a game. Denver's 29th at 33. It's something, and Denver runs a lot of off-ball stuff because you have Jokic, but that's a huge difference. And it's one of those things that I think I think the off-ball movement is a great zag. I really do. I love it. I think more teams should lean into like this being an approach when things happen. A lot of times you get stagnant stuff or like a 45 cut or things like that. You don't really get this holistic approach to off-ball movement. I worry a little bit when I watch their offense against the best teams. And I worry a little bit about what it might look like when they get into a series against teams. Now, I dug into them a little bit versus the top 6, and they're one of the top 6 in the West. So it's the 6 teams other than them. And the top 6 in the East, they have a losing record. So they're 10-11 against, the best teams. And against the rest, the bottom teams, they're just cutting them up. And I think one thing that always stands out to me is the top teams, the teams that are building those habits for the end of the season, they're locked in and connected on defense. They're not giving up as many drives, from just an isolation action. And sometimes I see, when I look at Jaren Jackson Jr., like he's getting these ISO actions. He's big into it, but he's also turning the ball over and he's got a low assist rate. So I think like sometimes you see the results and they're good in terms of their big numbers, but sometimes the process to me falls a little short. And given how they've gone in the playoffs, it's one thing I'm a little interested to see, like when the rubber meets the road and it's 2-1 and they're in game 4, like what do? Do they lean into this more? Do they lean into where they've been, or do they lean out and start to go back to like, 50 pick and rolls this game. This is what we're running. Like we just want the ball in Ja's hands. This is what we're going to do come hell or high water.
Yeah, for sure. And you hit the nail on the head with, the teams that they're again, every team struggles against the best teams, but obviously if you're one of the best teams,
you should kind of if we're an outside contender, we want to see you be able to beat these teams consistently.
100%. And it's one of those things where, you're talking about the low pick and roll frequency. The teams that they're struggling against are these physical defenses because, as great as Ja Morant is, it's hard to go ISO with. Watch the recent game against Oklahoma City. He was struggling against Alex Caruso.
Alex Caruso had him in jail. Dude, he absolutely had him in jail.
Never seen a defender have jaw like that in my life. Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, they were taking turns on Ja Morant. It's these physical defenses that you cannot create advantages against in isolation who also like attack the gaps. So like if the Grizzlies, like for example, I'm working on a turnover piece this week. It should be out when the podcast is out. But Ja Morant would drive or Desmond Bane would drive. And since even though they can't create that advantage, they're trying to pass. But next thing you know, you have Josh Hart jumping a passing lane, turnover, outlet, bucket. Like that's a huge swing right there. So they got to definitely find a way to sprinkle in like diversity in their offense. I know Taylor Jenkins has talked about getting more pick and roll in because they want Ja Morant pick and roll still. They want Zach Edey in those actions as well because he's a big pick and roll target and they need to develop him in that way, get him ready for the playoffs in that way. But also like maybe it's sprinkling in more off-ball actions to get the help kind of moving a little bit. Or they love running these Iverson cuts as well. They do that with Ja Morant pretty frequently. Well, they'll have Ja come off the Iverson and into an empty corner, and there's a lot more space. And then instead of him, I think you used the term in your article recently. You called it like a torpedo. Instead of torpedoing to the basket, he's going into more space and having a different angle into attacking the basket off of this off-ball movement.
Yeah.
Like there's ways that they can free up those looks and then ultimately get better looks, cut down their turnovers, aside from just pick and roll. Because frankly, like, it's not like Ja Morant is this Trae Young, Luka, or De'Aaron Fox pick and roll guy, because he doesn't have the pull-up jumper. It'd be one thing if it was like, okay, Ja is taking 4 or 5 threes out of pull-up threes per game. You know, he's not doing that.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I talked to somebody the other day in the league, and I talked that you mentioned this name. I said, you know, in the hierarchy of John, the Howard Beck report just came out and all this other stuff. I just said, like, could you imagine, you know, Josh seen an all NBA level point guard, all-star point guard. Could you imagine with this offense? Because I think Memphis's team is really set up for a star, a 1A type player. Could you imagine what this offense would look like with Trae Young instead of Ja Morant? I mean, this thing would look like an absolute atom bomb. Like the complementary players that they have moving around with its Aldama, Kennard, Bain, Jackson, Edie, you know, Gigi and Vince. Like they just keep coming at you over and over again. Yep. And there's something about Ja where I love when he makes under control actions. I love when he plays in rhythm and on balance. He's a special athlete, but too many times I see him rely on just his athleticism. Too many times I see him rely on just running into somebody and not solving the problem creatively early, winning early, whether it's shooting, whether it's setting up floaters or pull-ups. And so to me, like, that's the thing that I've always seen in the playoffs that's held him back and holds Memphis back in that sense, because they'll only go as far as he'll go. And when they get to the playoffs, the shells, they get compressed, you know, everybody can pack it in. I always look at average distance of pick and rolls in the playoffs his whole time. The average distance away from the hoop that screens are set is 23 feet. So basically inside the arc, it just gets so tight and it gets so easy to guard them. And to me, he's kind of the differentiating factor of, if he could ever, you know, get that thing going where he could shoot the ball, he could make these plays that would stretch the defense, this offense explodes.
Oh yeah, like I get that. I actually think the thing that really, for like the whole Ja Morant playoff ceiling, I don't think it's about much his game, because he's been a playoff riser, even with these areas of improvement. You know, he's joined this company of like scoring 45 points before the age of 23 with Kobe and LeBron. And I even think in the playoffs, I think this infrastructure is set up better for him now, because the only floor spacer that they had, like in 22, the only one they really had was Desmond Bain. Dylan Brooks shot them out of playoff series. And then, like, we even saw the benefit of, even though he wasn't shooting the ball a lot, like just having Luke Kennard on the floor opened up the floor so much for Ja. But like, yeah, he needs to improve. He needs to bring the floater back more into his game. He needs that, like, obviously the pull-up J would be great, but he needs one in the mid-range as well. But I think the thing that really is the deciding factor between Ja Morant and playoff ceiling, it's the durability. Because in 2022, he was averaging 38, 7, and 7 against the Warriors in the semifinals before he got hurt. He got hurt in Game 3. He was out 4, 5, 6. They're out. He got hurt in Game 1 or Game 2. Or no, Game 1 of the Grizzlies-Lakers series in 23. Missed Game 2. Played through it. Games 3, 4, 5, 6. I think they had different issues that led to that series loss, mainly losing Steven Adams and Brandon Clark before the playoffs started. But with the durability, he has not played 5 games in a row since the 22-23 season. And I think that's big for him, like getting a rhythm, getting a hand in on this new offense. Like, it's tough to gain a rhythm. I'm sure you understand, like, from being player development coach and being a former player, if you're, you know, playing 4 games and then you're out for a couple games and then you're in a ramp up, you're back in. It's that cycle where you're almost in a constant ramp up. You're not really getting into a rhythm.
Yeah,
I think that's going to be big for Ja.
That's wild. I've never heard that stat, and it's something that, to me, last thing on Ja before we move on, it's more so of how he plays the game and evolving how he play. And yes, like a jump shot would be great. I don't see that coming. I think we would have seen different signs of development in his mechanics by now. So like I'm not holding my breath for that, but just in terms of the middies, the pull-ups, the floaters, how he attacks the basket, like those things, like they all lead into durability, especially when you're a smaller guard stature wise, like he is. It's tough. The guys that play in the NBA are absolute mutants. I mean, they're huge. They're a different breed of human from everybody else. So like when you're taking that contact over and over, like that just wears on you. So in that sense, moving on to them in the playoffs, are you at a place where, you know, they've had the injuries, they've had this, are you at a place where if we get another playoff flame out, is this blow it up, or do you want to see more?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it's that. I think if anything, what they'll try to do is maybe they'll make that trade where it's like, okay, we're giving up these picks. Oh, we got to throw in JJ Jackson. Okay, fine, we'll do that too, and they'll go get another guy to help the core. I don't think they're quite to blow it up yet, because at the end of the day, Ja Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, they're all like 25, 26 years old. Yeah, you don't blow up a 25, 26 core unless there's just bad vibes.
Yeah.
And there's no bad vibes. Like, they all rally behind Taylor Jenkins, and they still have that. Granted, it's not that same pregame dancing, postgame interview bombs, all that. It's like they have this maturity about them. Like, it's great. Like, you know, after the Oklahoma City loss, like, you know, they lost pretty good, and that's a loss where, you know, you could kind of be down on yourself, have bad vibes in the locker room. But they were all like, we know why we lost. We lost because they got all these offensive rebounds, and you can only give up only so many offensive rebounds in second possessions before it's detrimental. Like, they knew it, and they're like, we got to move on to the next game. There's a more mature togetherness that they have, so I don't think you break that up unless there was something that was fractured beyond that. I do remain more optimistic, and I think the reason why I remain more optimistic is because I think you've had guys like Jaren and Dez close the gap between Ja and them. You know, I think Jaren's become, you know, a 1A, 1B with Ja. And I think when you factor in the defensive end, I guess he's become this real mismatch at the 4 and 5. You know, too powerful for 4s, and he's too quick for most 5s. Yeah. If you factor in what he brings to you from almost an advantage creation standpoint, and from a defensive standpoint, he's their best player.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite archetype of player. The one at the 4-5 that can crack the defensive shell by bringing a double if they have a smaller guy, or getting past a 5 and creating a rotation and playmaking. That's my favorite archetype. That one to me feels the most. Then can create the most versatility, the most sustainable offense. You can go DHO stuff. You can go pick and roll. You can go ISO. There's just so much stuff you can do with a guy who can be a mismatch problem at those two positions. And then the defensive versatility that he gives you is off the charts too. His biggest thing was always staying on the floor with the foul troubles. And sometimes you see him, like there was one on SGA where SGA went to the lane and he just shoved him. Like there's some where you just see him make these frustration fouls, but in general, he's kind of curtailed that a little bit. And he's definitely understands the value he brings by being on the court. He's willing to let one go now to keep the foul.
Frankly, I've always thought that his fouling issues was more on the offensive side, you know, learning how to set better screens and just kind of, you know, a little bit, Jaren, like at the beginning of his career, he was kind of a baby deer a little bit. He would have like, oh my gosh, what did he just do? But then there's times the next possession down, he'll barrel into someone.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's, I've always said, I said it, you know, when it got to like year 5, year 6, you're like, man, dude, it's year 5, year 6. You got to cut down the fouls. I started to watch more of what the fouls were, and it's a lot of these offensive ones, like just barreling into guys, either getting downhill or setting screens.
Yeah.
And I think that would help. But no, he's truly become like this, you know, an all NBA caliber big man, like one that I've foreseen him becoming ever since, you know, his sophomore year. He was making 40% of his threes on 6 attempts a game. I thought he could become an all NBA big, finally did. I would say, though, the thing that he needs to grow into to become a 1A on a championship team, though, is, you talked about guys that crack the shell, force help, force rotations. While his assist numbers have gone up and he's shown more flashes of being a better playmaker, he still needs to kind of get off the ball a little bit early and read doubles better. Sometimes he lets the double linger a little bit too long. He'll throw a wild skip pass and it's intercepted.
Yeah.
That's where he needs to grow. But other than that, it's hard to really nitpick Jaren because of how good and impactful he's been to this team this year.
Yeah, I always wonder about him. You just mentioned him becoming that. I always wonder about what is the skill that he hangs his hat on when it gets to the playoffs. A lot of guys you think about okay, Jokic is going to hang his hat in the post. And if you double him, he's going to play make out of that. But every single time, if you just leave him single coverage, he's going to score. Or if you play with him and Murray, if you don't get up to the level with Murray, he's going to shoot it in the pick and roll. And if you do, he's going to play to Jokic, and it's either going to be floater if you don't help up the lane, or it's going to be lob to Gordon or spray out to the corner if you do help up the lane. So I always think about when it comes to playoff time, what do these guys hang their hat on where they know this is where I'm going to? And Jaren Jackson Jr., when I watch him play, the raw numbers add up, but there's nothing that I look at that says this is where this guy's going to hang his hat on when the going gets tough and teams are scheming. And I know that he can go to this. And I know once he goes to this, if they leave him single coverage, he's going to eat it up. And once he does, they're going to have to bring two. And when I watch him play, I never get a sense of what that is. The baby deer comment really always sticks out. When he's in ISO situations, he's kind of barreling into people. He's 60th percentile in turnovers, 30th percentile in assists and ISOs. The 3-point shooting, he's 36%. And it doesn't scare you. When he shoots it, I'm not a proponent of, if it's awkward mechanics and you shoot a great percentage on high volume, don't touch it.
Yeah.
But there's something about him that always leaves me in that place where I'm where's the thing that he's going to hang his hat on?
For sure. I get that. I would say this year specifically, whether it's in ISO, whether it's in post, he's developed his floater, that push shot near the paint. It's mainly done near the block and around that, the floater zone, I would call it, that short mid-range shot in the paint. I want to say I saw something from Kirk Goldsberry, or I think that's his name.
Kirk Goldsberry?
No, yeah. He had a field goal percentage by zones, and Jaren was the best in those two zones in particular. It's the around the left block,
the no man's land, the purgatory zone, call it.
Yeah, so it's one of those. Okay, he has that shot, but again, it's one of those things. What is he what is that going to look like? In playoff coverages, I thought, I think a good context of a potential playoff series and what he can see is watch the Clippers because they're still playing. They're playing Edey against Zubac, so Zubac can kind of float a little bit because they're not spacing with Edey. Even though he showed some 3-point stuff, he's mainly going to be in the dunker because at the end of the day, he helps with the possession game.
If he can stay on the floor. I mean, people are going to put – I've seen, the college thing where he was able to handle college guards, but, there's a massive difference between playoff guards and college guards in the tournament.
100%.
There are times where I was watching the Oklahoma City game, and he's up to the level. Yeah. They're early on, up to the level on SGA, up to the level. They're getting great stuff in pockets, 4-on-3 situations. They play him in drop, and, I thought SGA's eyes were going to pop out of his head. He was in drop, and it was I'm attacking this guy and it was bucket or foul, bucket or foul. I mean, there's a big difference between, what can you do with him on the college game to stay on the court, but these NBA guys they're different when they see him in the drop.
For sure. And that's why the Grizzlies optionality is so big. I mean, and also real quick on that Clippers note, because they were able to float Zubac, they had Harden on Jaren, Harden's an awesome post defender. No one talks about it.
We had Mike D'Antoni on here. Jacob knows. We were talking to Coach D'Antoni. He was those guys, Harden, all his guys, they were we got this. Don't send help. Yeah, he's a fire hydrant down there.
Yeah. And so then they can send Zubac over to double, or they can send the closest perimeter defender over. It's usually Powell or Jones or Dunn over to help. And, they kind of put teams in hell because of that defensive infrastructure right there. But on the Edey front, that's why the Grizzlies' optionality and really kind of the development of their front court, not just with Jaren, but Brandon Clark becoming or remaining an impactful player after rupturing his Achilles and Santi Aldama becoming what he's been, where I'm to the point where I like if Edey's not working in a playoff series, like, okay, I can trust Brandon Clark and Santi Aldama to give me 25 minutes or 20 minutes in a playoff series and be fine.
I love Santi Aldama. I think I mean
he rocks.
The bag is coming his way. To me, he's the thing that when they get in a playoff series, I think he's the one that's going to stand out because there's something. I think they're going to go a lot of Jaren at the 5 and him at the 4. There's something that he can bring. We talked about Ja and pick and roll stuff. They never had a guy setting picks for Ja like this guy. You cannot play so far back in a drop when it comes to this guy because he will pop and rip that thing from 3.
Yep.
To me, he's going to be the biggest X factor in terms of unlocking all the previous playoff problems they had in terms of spacing. And I can't wait to see what their offense looks like with him on the floor because I think he's going to end up playing like 30 minutes a game in the playoffs, 32. I think his minutes are going to skyrocket, and he's going to be one of those guys that you're going to look and you're going to be like, this Memphis team works because he unlocks it.
You know, Mark, after this podcast, I want to make sure I clip this so I can push my Santi Aldama agenda.
Yes,
because like
absolutely.
That's like spot on because I think people put Santi, mainly Grizzlies fans, put Santi in the same bucket as Vince Williams, Jalen Wells, GG Jackson of like, can this young guy work? And I'm like, okay, he shot 46% in his first playoff series, but like we're all ignoring the Olympic experience. Like playing in the Olympics and being the guy for Spain, he was their best player in both FIBA Cup in 23 and at the Olympics last year. The dude's a baller. He's a big game player. I think he's going to be a big game player. I think he's going to be a guy, you know, like you saw the Dallas Oklahoma City series last year where guys like PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. won them that series. I think Santi Aldama can swing that for them. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, like, you know, you have your stars. They're the ones that you need to rely upon to win multiple series. You'll have one guy who gets hot for a couple games and helps you win a series. And then you have a role player that can help you win a game. Santi can help you win a series.
Yeah, absolutely. PJ is a great example. I think Santi's one of those guys that unlocks so many lineups for them. He unlocks so many spacing issues for them, and he unlocks a lot of the optionality and the versatility with them. So we'll get you out of here on this one. We got 20 some odd games left, 28 games left in the Grizzlies season, and then the playoff run. What do you want to see over these last 28 games from this team heading into the playoffs?
I think that they already have done this, and it's shown through the Grizzlies' willingness to move, you know, guys like last year they moved David Roddy, they moved Zaire Williams, and in this season they moved Marcus Smart and Jake LaRavia. I really, now that they're back from injury, I want to see Vince Williams and GG Jackson grab the bull by the horns and get ready for this moment. I think Jalen Wells has done great. I think he can be great in the playoffs. Obviously, but it's also a lot to ask from a rookie. You know, I think he's a consistent shooter, consistent defender, but he doesn't have the chaos creation that Vince Williams and GG Jackson could provide on either side of the floor. Like by either side of the floor, like Vince Williams, your quintessential like playoff pest, really, I'll call it. He's just a chaos creator. He's going to crash the glass. He's going to be physical against other teams' starts. He's going to try to create cycle opportunities with his turnover generation and running the break. He can pass the ball as well. I think he's the guy that, you know, if Jalen Wells, if the moment's looking too big for him in a playoff series, they're going to go to Vince Williams. I want to see him healthy and ready for that playoff challenge. And with GG Jackson, I don't have high expectations for him this postseason just because he's 20 years old. He's getting into playing meaningful basketball after last season, but also too, he's learning how to play in a new body type. He's now, instead of 6'9", 210, 215, he's now like 6'9", 235. So he's learning an entire new body type. But, you know, developing that consistency of learning to be not the guy, but a guy next to a core, because that was always the big thing with him coming out of college was he's always used to being the guy. He's always used to having the ball in his hands. What does it look like when it's not in his hands? You know, with GG, it's defending hard, cutting hard, hitting outside shots. Like, granted, I don't know if I trust GG Jackson to play in the playoffs over like Luke Kennard, but I think him showing that he can handle spot minutes if necessary would be huge for not just this season, but for as a runway towards next season as well.
I love it, man. So Parker, thanks for coming on. Plug. What do you have coming out?
Yeah, so you could follow my Substack, Subtsakalidis. It's a Memphis Grizzlies and NBA draft Substack. It's all free and nothing's behind a paywall. But if you decide to be a
proceeds go where? You have one of the coolest things going on Substack. Proceeds go where?
So proceeds go to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. My wife was diagnosed with cancer 12 years ago, and if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have met her. So it's like I give them everything. I give them everything I can.
Such a cool thing, man. It's amazing.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that big time.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on, Parker Fleming. We'll be checking back in as the Grizzlies go into the playoffs this year.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it.
Later.